Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. And Chag Sukkot Sameach, a happy Sukkot to everyone. Okay. One moment, please. My screen is... So Steve apologizes. He had a chance to go visit his son in Mexico that came up suddenly. So we're on our own, and our job today is to finish chapter 9, chapter 9, which we began last time. It's the beginning of Saul's career, so to speak, or more details as far as Saul's career is concerned. And just before we get started, this is the holiday of Sukkot for those of us here that are not in the Jewish tradition. We have a sukkah, we have a booth outside. I'm looking right at it through the window, but it's just too hot to be out there. Otherwise, it would have been appropriate to study. And it's already probably 95 degrees here in Palm Springs. Who knows? In any case, I did bring though the lulav and etrog to share with you for those that don't get a chance to see this often or at all. The 4 species that are stipulated, well, they're hinted at in the book of Leviticus: a palm frond, a myrtle, willows, and an etrog or citron, and so if at all possible, we have a chance to maybe collectively do this mitzvah. I'll do it together with everyone here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat lulav. We give thanks and we give praise to the Holy One for bringing us into this world of commandments, and the specific commandment to take these 4 species on the days of Sukkot. As I turn the etrog upwards and shake in the 4 directions, up and down, and traditionally I would say the Hallel prayer, those chapters of Psalms that are recited on the holidays, with this in my hand. Just there's all sorts of different understandings and symbolisms of this in rabbinic work. But my favorite is a modern 20th century understanding of Noga Haruveni, who was a kind of a botanist and Bible scholar in the land of Israel, in the 20th century. And he reminded us that each of these species represents a different ecosystem in the land of Israel. The palm fronds, the palms grow in the oasis, the desert where there's water. The willows grow only in the riverside, next to the rivers, next to the wells and the springs, where there's a constant source of water all around. And the myrtle grows on the hillsides and the mountains. Those three natural ecosystems, and the etrog only grows with human cultivation. And so we take these species together on Chag HaSukkot, on this festival of booths, and I like to think that we watch them wilt in our hands for 7 days and understand the need for rain, which we'll be praying for on Monday on Shmini Atzeret. So, hope that was all right that I shared that with you, not necessarily to the text per se. And but I guess to remind ourselves that these folks that are in our conversations now, we always think of circumcision. We think of eating kosher. We think of Shabbat as those things on the border which they were arguing about in the first days of the church. There's so many other things as well, and that would be I don't think there is a mention of Sukkot with Jesus in the Gospels, we had it here in Acts as well. We had mention of this particular holiday. It was a gathering, a time of when the most amount of people could come to the temple in Jerusalem because the agricultural work was done. But I don't know that there's any direct comments about the four species or being in a sukkah in the New Testament. But let's remember that those are things in the background as well. There's a whole plethora of things that Jews were doing, and it would be interesting to know, besides circumcision and Shabbat and eating kosher, which were the things that were debated and which were the things that were left aside. Okay. Before we begin, any comments about our study last week? Any questions that came up during the week? Because I'm sure every day you go over your notes and review what we did. Nothing then. Okay. All right. All right then. Don, you want to lead us in the reading today? The first reading. We're in verse 23, chapter 9, verse 23.
Yeah, just a preface to it. It struck me as it being a very dangerous and wild time for all this to happen. And there's something about Middle Eastern anger that kind of permeates through these readings, not only in Israel, but in the whole Middle East. The ideas of retribution and ideas of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, kind of thing.
So I think I wanted to maybe take maybe not agree or to give another side of that is most people in our world, I think, especially in the church world or in religious circles that study sacred texts, that's what they have a window to. They have a window to the 2,000 years ago or even before to the Middle East, to the ancient Near East, the Middle East. But my guess is, Don, that in China and in Cambodia and in Australia and all the different places around the world, especially where there are long-standing established civilizations with a lot of money at work, and things like that, and slavery. My guess is we would find this everywhere. I mean, whether it's what we see of the papacy, in some of the historical TV programs that we see, whatever it may be. I think this kind of stuff is going on everywhere, to tell you the truth. That would be.
Can I add something to that? Having lived in Haifa for 2.5 years, and of course seen a lot of Jerusalem and the whole countryside, I would tell you, I think of the Israeli people being like the rest of us. They're no different than the rest of us, really, truly. In fact, I think when I was living in Haifa, I used to think of Haifa as being a European city almost. Russian being the most common language spoken in the streets, but they're really very much like us. And I wish I could be back there right now.
No. Well, that being said, Don, you are correct. This is a dangerous. There seems to be a lot of danger on the streets here in the chapters that we're reading right now, and that is true. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start with verse 23.
Yes, please.
After some time had passed, the Jews plotted to kill him, but their plot became known to Saul. They were watching the gates day and night so that they might kill him. But his disciples took him by night and let him down through an opening in the wall, lowering him in a basket.
Okay. So, what do we think about this little story here?
I would like to know, lowering him in a basket from where? How high up was he? Was he somewhere high up? I mean,
Well, it sounds like to get over the walls, right? They're watching the gates of the walls. So the walls were what, 4 or 5 meters? 6 meters. It's hard. I'm thinking of the modern day Jerusalem. The walls were built during the under the Ottomans, right? So I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine how high a wall was, but yes, high enough that you can't just climb it easily and smooth. Um, so. And not going through the gate. So any does this bring up any memories from biblical literature, Hebrew biblical literature?
Jericho.
Right. What happened in Jericho?
The woman, I forgot her name, but the woman who helped the Israelite soldiers. She gave them the
Rahab.
entrance into the city, and then they protected her. She's a prostitute, I think.
Right.
And she put a red scarf up.
Yeah, Rachav, right? And we actually mentioned her yesterday. Debbie,
Yeah, right.
daughter Debbie, mentioned her in a talk she gave about labyrinths in Jericho and the shofar. Yeah, so that was one way because the gates are watched. There's another, and I think you'd say, well, there's a lot of stories in the world of people who are sneaking out of cities and they're lowered down, perhaps. But the context here is the Jewish community of the land of Israel, and in the background literature is the Hebrew Bible. So that's one text I think is in the background here, and there's also another text.
David,
Yes, Don.
the, the biblical person of David,
Oh,
when he's
sorry.
trying to get away from, I'm sorry, he's trying to get away from Saul.
Okay, but there's no story of him being lowered over or them watching the gates. Which of the? I mean, he escapes through the night. We don't have do we have the details? We have the story of shooting the arrow with Jonathan, and it's dangerous. But yes, there is this running away, and that would be totally pertinent here. Somebody who's going to be the leader is on the run in the beginning. I'm thinking of one story that may not be obvious, and that is Samson. Samson and the gates of Gaza, and they're waiting to ambush him at the gates. So what does he do? Any remember what he does, Samson? He just pulls up the gates. He's so big and he's so strong. He just picks up the gates, puts them on his shoulder, and starts walking away. Another way of dealing with it. So here, I think the point is more like the story in Joshua, where he's sneaking away, but he has help, and that's an important thing. He's running for his life, but he has help, he has support. So as the story builds, as the narrative builds, it feels like this is one little element of showing that he begins to find more support than he had. Tom, we're in chapter 9. We've just read 23 to 25, and we're about to read 26. Don, why don't you go and read another section for us?
When he had come to Jerusalem, he attempted to join the disciples, and they all were afraid of him, for they did not believe that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took him brought him to the apostles and described for them how on the road he had seen the Lord who had spoken to him, and how in Damascus he had spoken boldly in the name of Jesus. So he went in and out among them in Jerusalem, speaking boldly in the name of the Lord. He spoke and argued with the Hellenists, but they were attempting to kill him. When the brothers and sisters learned of it, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him off to Tarsus.
Okay. So the power is building, the power of his leadership is building, I think, but he's constantly on the run and he needs to be protected. He's gone from Damascus to Jerusalem because you would think that that's what happened. You come to Jerusalem to be the new, well, not the new savior. I want to be careful with the words I'm using, but I'm thinking of the word savior not in the context of Jesus, but this reminds me a little bit of Moses in Moses' growing pains as a leader. You'll remember that Moses, after being shut up in the palace of the Pharaoh for his pre-adult years, he's adult, he goes out into the street and he sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating one of his somehow he knows he's a Hebrew, and he kills that taskmaster, buries him, looks both ways to make sure nobody sees him, and then the next day he tries to make peace with the two Hebrews who are fighting with each other, and one of them says to the other, "Who put you in charge? Who made you in charge of us? Are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian?" So he knows that the word is out, and then he runs, and he runs for his life, and he goes to Goshen,
Yeah.
and hangs out with, not to Goshen, to Yitro and the Midianites. And there again, he has a chance to be he's trying to be a savior, and it's not working so well. And then he saves the daughters of Yitro. It's growing pains through his leadership, but he's moved on the constant move, and then he wanders in with the sheep for 40 years. Maybe there's a little bit of that in the background here as well. But what's clear is we all know by the time this book is being written, is published, people know that Saul is going to be the leader. Paul is going to be an important part, but it doesn't come easy. Any comments or questions?
Yeah, it seems to me, and it bothers me, but it was probably just the period that, Saul is someone that is disagreeable and that this group doesn't like, and their solution to that is to kill him rather than, I know that during the Roman period, the Romans had little value on human life other than their own. And that's what it seems like. That's the culture that it's coming out of. Rather than just excommunicating him, expelling him from their group, they have to murder him in order to deal with their disagreement. And it's like Don was saying, it's just very unpleasant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what happens. People today, you don't like your political adversary. You wish that people. Well, some people do, but I mean, even to wish them dead is kind of like. I don't know, just unpleasant.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think that's a little bit hard on the Romans, personally.
Go ahead.
I think they actually did frequently have more value on human life, although not always. But I think saying they didn't put any value on human life is just not correct.
Mm-hmm. Well, to remind us what we're talking about, not the Romans here, but we're talking about the Hellenists here, the references to the Jewish Hellenists, I believe, right? And so this is even worse. Richard, it's even worse because it's amongst the our brethren, our sisters, right? The Jewish people. Perhaps I'll go back to what Don said, the tit for tat, the eye for an eye, because remember that we learned beforehand that Saul was a murderer himself, or was killing people himself. So that's why they're so afraid of it. It's not that they didn't like his views. He was perceived to be a threat. Of course, we know that he's already done repentance, so to speak, or he's always changed his ways, and that's the difficult, and that's the irony of it. Of course, he's already a different person, yet he's still persecuted. I think somebody else was trying to say something. Ajit?
I have a question, and this is about a definition of the term apostle. Who is one? I have always felt that the 12 that were gathered around Jesus were apostles by dint of having been in the presence of Jesus. Is that, am I wrong in there, or am I missing something?
Well, look, I'm not the one to answer this question. This is a Steve question, right? But it seems to me, yes. And we saw the widening of the circle of the meaning of apostle since the beginning of Book of Acts, because they were no longer people that were present, right? It got passed on to another generation or to another circle. And so what's being referred to, what your question is based on in this paragraph, is that who gets to say who's an apostle? Right? So Paul kind of gets a fast track, right? He has his own vision he has his own one-on-one with Jesus, and the others, and maybe that's what's bothering them, they didn't get to do that, right? It's all secondhand from them or third hand.
Maybe they don't believe him.
I think so, yeah. Don, what do you, in your background, how do you feel about it?
I think the term apostle dates back to those designated by Jesus as followers. Paul gets swept into that because he has this experience on the road to Damascus. But I think there's something else here, and that is the suspicion that maybe Paul isn't who he says he has now become. And there is suspicion on the Hellenist Jews that he's going to do the same thing to them that he might have done to the Christians in the earlier passage. So, I mean, I think there's a human dynamic here that is threatening to the Hellenists. That would be my take on it.
Okay. Anyone else?
If I could, I came in late.
Sure.
But I'd like to go back to one part earlier on, and I'm curious about this when it said he belonged to the way, and way is capitalized. I'm wondering, I assume the Greek word might be hodos, which means road. But I wonder what the way specifically means.
Yeah, we actually did the first half of the chapter last week, and we discussed this a little bit, mostly to say that we don't know. There's nothing in the Jewish sources that I found that would say, we really only understand it from the context here, I think. I'm not sure. Yeah, other than when people feel, I mentioned last week that from a semantic point of view, you find this at least in Orthodox Judaism, or in traditional Judaism, Matsuat derech. A derech is the way as well. It's the same word, derech, and there was another word that we found. And it goes a little bit back to the concept of tshuva, which is which is often we've discussed before, right? It's returning. Where are you returning to? You're returning to the proper way of life, to the real way, the truth, the way of truth, right?
That was such a good point that you made several weeks ago, saying it's changing, getting back into the right lane,
right?
Which I thought was interesting. And going along with this, the street called straight. So I don't know if that has to do with it, but I'm wondering in the Greek if way is hodos, meaning road. I wonder what it is there.
Yeah, I didn't check, and Steve, those are the kind of things that Steve knows kind of by heart, but I didn't check.
I've always considered the way is you had two choices: the way to salvation or the way to destruction.
Rabbi, can I read something to you very quickly?
Of course.
This is from Google. It says, what does Jesus mean by the way?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus further states that he is the way. This means he is the way to God, not one of many, but the one and only way. See Acts 4:12, Hebrews 10:19, 20. In the early church, Christianity was sometimes called the way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Which again, I don't know, it depends on what's the references there, how scientific is that, I think everybody knows it from here, from the context here, but yeah. Look at all these things. I think we can understand as far as what it was in Greek society. That's another level of study that I didn't prepare for, at least this time. But it's a good question, and it's something to go back to ask Steve. Although it didn't I don't think he had anything to say on it particular. But I just know from a Jewish literary point of view, there's really, it's not like it's falling back on something that's known. Um, um,
Could it be a sect too?
it could be a way. Yeah, it's certainly a way. And it again from an idea point of view, the idea, the thinking of the text that we have from the Dead Sea Scrolls, a lot of it points to that as well. It's very yes or no. It's not our gathering here of multiple paths up the mountain. That's kind of our philosophy here. Theirs is no. There's very much, as Rita said. There's two ways. There's the good way and the bad way. That's all. There's the right way and the wrong way. Yeah. Okay. Tom, you want to read the next section from 31?
Let's see. Hold on just a second. And I'll go there. Yes. Yes. Meanwhile, the church throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria had peace and was built up, living in the fear of the Lord and in the comfort of the Holy Spirit increased in numbers.
Okay, and this is I think it's the only time that the Galil is mentioned in Acts. This is Acts is very much about other areas, whereas the Galilee was a geographical kind of focal point for the Gospels, at least part of the Gospel.
Yes.
And it feels like. Go ahead.
Oh, the next part, the healing of Aeneas.
Mm-hmm.
Where Aeneas was the great hero of the Roman epic, the Aeneid, and I've never seen Aeneas used in the New Testament before.
Yeah, well, the names that we've run into are. I think we found that more often than not, that it's some of the same names are used more and more. This is this. I don't know anything more about this Aeneas here, but it's like Simon that we see so many times, and some of the other names.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little wary. I'm a big one on learning something from the names in the Hebrew text of the Hebrew Bible, because I think it's gone through that much polishing from a literary point of view over that many more centuries, that more often than not the name means something as opposed to necessarily that's who the person was really called, right? But that's for another time, perhaps. So why don't you read the next section for us as well until through 35?
Yeah, the healing of Aeneas. Now, as Peter went here and there among all the brothers and sisters, he came down also to the saints living in Lydda. There he found a man named Aeneas, who had been bedridden for 8 years, for he was paralyzed. Peter said to him, Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up and make your bed. And immediately he got up, and all the residents of Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned up to the Lord.
Okay, so we've gone. The previous section talked from a geographical point of view of the Galilee and Judea, which is the eastern part of the land of Israel, and Samaria. That's the eastern. Now we're going down to the coastal areas, and we've got some sound problems here. Down to the coast area, Lydia, Lod, not far from the coast, from Tel Aviv, say today, and as we'll see in a second, from Jaffa as well. And Sharon is that coastal plain. The Sharon is the coastal plain of the land of Israel, and so the peace is spreading, the belief, the faith is spreading, and then we're treated to these two stories in specific here. And I don't know a lot to do. I don't have a lot to do with why this story is so. The next one, there's a lot more to say, I think. But this story, maybe the only thing that I would say here is that it's clear how the healing is happening here. The healing is happening through Jesus. It's not the people themselves, right? Peter is not the healer. I think that's important to show you. Peter's not the healer. Jesus is the healer. It doesn't. We don't. There's nothing about him. There's no touching going on, right? There's no laying of hands, right? There's no incantation. There's no praying either, right? So it's to me it's a little bit strange, but maybe it just wants to accentuate the fact that it's only Jesus who's healing.
But David, it's not only the fact of that healing, but the residents who witnessed this had a conversion experience in their own lives. So they became now part of what was going on here,
Right.
which I think is, I mean, that extends the healing process outside of an individual body into a group of people.
Good point. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Does this also imply then that others could heal through Jesus? Not necessarily the early first century Christians, but later Christians could heal through Jesus. Could the Pope or somebody not touch somebody and say, I heal you through Jesus, and they would be healed?
So I think this connects us to the question before about apostleship, right? Who gets to do that? Who can do it? Who's able to do it? And maybe that's, yeah. I don't think everybody can go to it. It's not like today where everybody could say, I heal you in the name of Jesus. Or maybe that's not, maybe I'm over exaggerating, but it seems to me, mostly from TV and movies, that you see faith healers that, like, who made them? How did they become faith healers? I don't know. Again, this is that's kind of a Steve question. I'm gonna write down these Steve questions for next week. Okay, folks?
Yeah, David, not for today, but a question that I have is just the Hebrew origins of laying on of hands. So, again, that's not something we need to go into today, but it does occur to me that, clearly that must go back earlier on to the Jewish tradition.
Right. So I actually began, I don't know, a month and a half ago, I remember, and starting to look through the Greek usage of in the New Testament, and it's so much in the Acts as well, but also in the Septuagint. And I started to make notes, and I need to go back to those notes. I stopped in the middle at some point. But that's a really good question. In general, what is laying the hands? Just offhand, there's laying hands of the priests on the sacrifices. That's kind of maybe a transference of sorts. In rabbinic tradition, there's laying of hands to bestow authority on someone else. I can't think of a case in rabbinic literature. Well, yes, there's a case, not laying of hands, but touching of hands in healing. A text that I think I brought before about Rabbi Yochanan, who sticks out his hand. Now, tells so let's go back to that. Yeah, that deserves a whole hour, I think, devoted to the whole idea of laying hands, what it means.
I didn't mean to hurt us from the way in our discussion, but just wanted to add that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, anything else before we go on? Okay, Eileen, would you like to read 36 onward?
Sure. Now in Joppa there was a disciple whose name was Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. At that time she became ill and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in a room upstairs. Since Lydia was near Joppa, the disciples, who had heard that Peter was there, sent 2 men to him with the request, please come to us without delay. So Peter got up and went with them, and when he arrived, they took him to the room upstairs. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter put all of them outside, and then he knelt down and prayed. He turned to the body and said, Tabitha, get up. Then she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then, calling the saints and widows, he showed her to be alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Meanwhile, he stayed in Joppa for some time with a certain Simon, a tanner.
Okay, so what do you think?
Oh.
I think the cave of Simon the Tanner in Jaffa is a wonderful place to visit.
I've never been there.
Right along the road as you walk from Tel Aviv to the cave, and
Ah,
wonderful Indian restaurant there called Taj Mahal right next to the cave.
okay. Thank you for your. Well, I stay near there whenever I stay in Tel Aviv, so there's something to check out. Let's ask. Maybe let's ask those that for whom this is a new story. Those that did not grow up reading New Testament. What strikes you in this story? Anybody? That would be kind of Richard and Eileen, I think.
Well, this time he prayed. He prayed and he touched her. In the first story, there really wasn't any prayer.
Mhm.
He just spoke. I don't know what that means.
And at what point in the narrative did he touch her?
He turned to he prayed. He turned to the body and said, he gave her his hand and helped her up
Only after she came back to life.
after she opened her eyes. Right.
I think that's important here. I think so. Yes, the prayer is definitely involved here. He's alone with her, right? Where is this happening?
Upstairs in her bedroom.
So upstairs. Richard, what do you think?
I think I think she didn't actually die.
You're skeptical. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because this is another story of someone being brought back to life. Is she Jesus? I mean, she comes back to life after dying.
Mhm.
Where was she during that period when she was dead?
Mhm.
Maybe I think they just thought she was dead.
Okay. Well, they're pretty specific that she died. They washed her. You'd think that when the body is washed, the tahara, then they would know for sure that she's dead. I don't know. Rita
I
Claire?
don't know. I mean, some people who are in a coma, their breath could be very shallow, and they're not scientists
Okay. Rita
or
Claire?
doctors.
I think this is kind of dangerous because, as we know, there are people who feel that it's all in the power of prayer, so much so that they neglect seeking any medical help when it's necessary. So, yeah, I'm very skeptical when I read these things that it invites people to capitalize on it.
Okay, so
I mean,
before we go on, let's remember that the story, as told here in a sacred text, tells us something that happened, 2,000 years ago, and may not be meant as prescriptive. It may be meant more as descriptive. And let's keep that in the background. But I think first Tom has something, and then Don
Yeah,
or the other.
I think that I think this reminds me of the story of Lazarus. When Lazarus is called forth from the tomb, I don't think it was a resuscitation at that time. I mean, according to the story. But the point I wanted to make is, what do you make of the sense of unity between Acts and the rest of the Christian Bible and the Hebrew Bible? What is that impressive to you? I mean, from a literary sense, I'm not talking from a spiritual or theological sense, but the unity of how these stories are taken from each other, woven, and produce a whole new creature, after they happen. Do you have a sense of response to that?
Yeah, I do, and that's where That's where I'm headed for.
Okay.
We'll get there in a few minutes, but I think that Tom wanted to say something.
Oh, no, it just reminds me, without being pejorative. The standpoint of the Christian Scientists that you don't need to go to a doctor. You just pray for healing, and God will take care of it.
Mhm.
But I want to, in defense of the text, though, as the text as being prescriptive, is that this text is not about a woman who is dying. This text is not about a woman who is sick. This text is about, and therefore, Richard, I want to take the text at face value, not as a historical fact. Maybe that is, maybe it's not. But what the storyteller is telling us is that this woman was dead, right? And so it's not about what happened, what really happened, from my point of view. This woman was dead, and then comes Peter. Everybody leaves the room, which you might say is suspect. Well, what's he doing? But the text, again, the storyteller says, all he did was to pray and say, it's time to get up. Right? And only afterwards put his hands. And now this leads me into Don's question about what is it? Is this connected to? All the time I'm hacking your Chainik Yiddish. I'm nudging you, everybody in this group, to say that there's a constant contact, as even something that may be as not so clear as the Joshua reference beforehand. But the reference here to me is really clear, and I didn't print it up, but I'm going to throw up on the screen, if that's all right. I'm going to throw up the text from where is it? We're here. The text from 2 Kings, Elisha, and let's do this we don't need to have the Hebrew here now. Okay, and then we're going to read the background of the story, because again, I think this is in the minds of the writers and the listeners, at least amongst the Jewish population. And if this text is aimed at somehow influencing those that were born Jews in these early years of the church, I think this is relevant. So a certain woman, the wife of one of the disciples of the prophets, cried out to Elisha. Elisha, I'll remind you, is Elijah's student, and kind of takes over and from a literary point of view, kind of outdoes his master in the amount of miracles and the way that he does it. There's a similar kind of story with Elijah, but we'll focus on this one now. Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know how your servant revered the Lord, and now a creditor is coming to seize my 2 children as slaves. Elisha said to her, what can I do for you? Tell me that you have in the house. Maidservant has nothing in the house except for a jug of oil. Go and borrow vessels outside from all your neighbors, empty vessels. And I think people maybe remember this story, right? And it's very similar to this story, the various traditions in the Gospels about Jesus providing food for. So I think that's very much in the background. One day, Elisha visited Shunem, this particular area. A wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to have a meal, and whenever he passed by, he would stop there for a meal. Once she said to her husband, I'm sure it is a holy man of God who comes this way regularly. Let us make a small enclosed upper chamber. Tom, this is for you. What I need to do is to check the Greek here to see what the upstairs is, the word, and see if it's the same as the Septuagint of the closed Aliyat Agag here, the closed upper chamber, and place a bed, a table, a chair, and a lampstand for him, so that he can stop here whenever he comes to us. One day he came. He retired to the upper chamber, lay down there. He said to his servant Gehazi, call the Shunammite woman. He called to her, he stood before her. He said to her, tell her, you have gone to all this trouble for us. What can we do for you? Can we speak in your behalf to the king or to the army commander? She replied, I live among my people. In other words, no, I don't need that kind of help. What can be done for her? He asked. The fact is, said Gehazi, she has no son, and her husband is old. Call her. And he called her and stood in the doorway. And Elisha said, at this season next year you will be embracing a son. Very similar to the angels with Abraham and Sarah, right? There's always intertextuality going on. Please, my Lord, man of God, do not delude your maidservant. Just like Sarah, the woman conceived and bore a son, and the same season the following year as Elisha had assured her. Again, just like Sarah and Isaac. The child grew up. One day he went out to his father among the reapers. Also similar to Isaac and Abraham, but the story takes a different turn. Suddenly he cried to his father, "Oh, my head, oh, my head." He said to a servant, "Carry him to his mother." He picked him up brought him to his mother, and the child sat on her lap until noon, and he died. He took him up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and left him and closed the door. So he just left him on the bed of the man of God, I think hoping in the same way that she hoped that he would bring his presence and the luck and the blessings to the house. Well, the same thing, putting the child on the bed. But of course, nothing happens. Then she called to her husband, please send one of the servants and one of the she-asses so I can hurry to the man of God and back. But he said, why are you going to him today? Why would you go to a man of God? It's neither Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, or Shabbat. He answered, but she said, it's all right. Just trust me. I need to do what I need to do. Because usually you would only do that kind of thing. You would only go on a special occasion. She had the ass saddled and said to her servant, by the way, the ass saddled is also reminiscent of the Abraham story. Urge the beast on, see that I don't slow down unless I tell you. She went on until she came to the man of God on Mount Carmel. Then the man of, by the way, Mount Carmel, the place where his master Elijah performed the great miracle of bringing the rain. When the man of God saw her from afar, he said to Gehazi, there is that Shunammite woman. Go hurry toward her and ask her, how are you? How is your husband? How is your child? We are well, she replied, which is kind of strange. But then she came up to the man of God on the mountain. She clasped his feet. Gehazi stepped forward to push her away. But the man of God said, let her alone, for she's in bitter distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. So, in other words, she said to Gehazi, I'm fine, everything's fine. I need to see the man himself. Because the power was seen to be with Elisha, not with the disciple, not with the apostle, if I can use that term right now, inexactly. Then she said, did I ask my Lord for a son? Didn't I say, don't mislead you? Why did you do this to me? I didn't want this. And now look at the situation. He said to Gehazi, tie up your skirts, take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, do not greet him. And if anyone greets you, do not answer him. And place my staff on the face of the boy. But the boy's mother said, as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you. So he arose and he followed her. He tried, Elisha also tried to not to do it himself, tried to pass on the discipleship, the apostleship, the power to his disciple, and it didn't work. She wouldn't have it. She wanted the real thing. She wanted the prophet himself. Gehazi had gone before them and placed the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound or response. He turned back to meet him and said, the boy is not awakened. In other words, the boy is dead. The bed didn't help. The staff didn't help. Elisha came into the house, and there was the boy, laid out dead on the couch. He went in, shut the door behind the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. And he mounted the bed and placed himself over the child. He put his mouth on its mouth, his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands, and he bent over it, and the body of the child became warm. And what is Richard thinking to himself right now? Well, of course, he resuscitated him in the way that we see, that we were trained in the army to do, right? He stepped down, walked once and down the room, then mounted and bent over him. Thereupon the boy sneezed 7 times, and the boy opened his eyes. Elisha called Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite woman. And he called her. When she came to him, she said, pick up your son. She came and fell at his feet, bowed to the ground, and that's the story from there. Now, I hope that you understand that why I see the connections to this story, right? It's not only bringing somebody to live, but it's also the way that the child was brought back to life. They tried through extensions of the prophet, but only the prophet himself could do it in the most physical way possible. And although the room where the child, and where was the room that the child was lying? In the prophet's upstairs. So the upstairs, the whole situation of bringing a child back to life, and yet what's different in our story in Jaffa? This is in Jaffa or Lydia? We're in Lydia. No, we're in Jaffa. Sorry, we're in Jaffa. The difference is that there is no touching. There's no touching. There's praying. And it's done in Jesus' name. I think to show that while in that story in Kings, the discipleship thing didn't work, the physical thing didn't work, here, the praying in Jesus' name, for Jesus' help, that's what worked. And I think that's what kind of, wins the argument, I would say. reactions
That's
to
interesting.
my thesis, my
Huh,
interpretation.
that's interesting. One question I was going to ask, I was reading a commentary on one of the Gospels by a New Testament scholar, and he said resurrection is really resuscitation. It's not really resurrection. And I wonder here, when they're talking about, the child or whoever, rising up, is this really resurrection or is it just resuscitation? It sounds to me from the pieces that we've been reading, this really just resuscitation.
Well, so that was how Richard understood our story here in Acts 9. One could certainly understand that in the Elisha story. On the other hand, well, perhaps, and then it happens to be his mouth, but it's also his hands, it's his whole body on him, which is not how we would usually do resuscitation. Um, and 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 my wife also tells me that my wife is an RN. Sasha always says that when we see on TV, the mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, they don't do that anymore. It's all about the hitting the heart and thing. Yes, that could be that could be true if we were looking at this from a historical point of view. I'll quote now my good friend and my teacher, Yair Zakovich, Professor Yair Zakovich, who, whenever this came up, and he did a lot, I've studied with him biblical narrative, all aspects of biblical narrative of Hebrew Bible, and when these things would come up with one of the students would ask, but don't you think this could be the plagues or the miracles of Elisha and Elijah? And that was in my first year at Hebrew University, I took a course with him. I fell on him. It happened to work with my schedule, and that sealed the deal with him. We've been close friends ever since. That was in 1982. He used to say, he says, I had no idea what was, but I can tell you what the storyteller wanted to tell us. The storyteller did not want to tell us that it's the red clay from the fields that fills the Nile and therefore it looked like blood. The storyteller did not want to tell us that it was low tide and it was high tide. The storyteller wanted to say the Nile was filled with blood, and the storyteller wanted to say that the water stood up like a wall on the right and on the left. And so again, it all depends on what your goals are in studying Bible. If your goals in studying the Bible or ancient text are for it to be literally true, historically true, then you're going to go in one direction, and that's a whole branch of biblical study. Biblical archaeology and biblical history. I was never drawn to that direction. To me, it's about the text is sacred. How was it meant? Can we figure out what the original text meant to tell us, and then how was it understood since then over the generations? That's what interests me personally. And it's not that I'm right and the others are wrong. That's not what I'm saying at all. But so I'm of the school of Zakovich that says it seems to me that what the story wanted to tell us here, and of course the other story is what was mentioned about Lazarus that Don mentioned. We would need to go back and look at the story of Lazarus in this light as well, which I didn't do for today. So what is the narrative try to tell us with this?
Rabbi, presuming from your argument though, so these people were dead. So there's Lazarus, there's the Shunammite woman's son, who I guess doesn't have a name, and this woman. What does it mean then that they're saying they're dead? Are they in another place? Are they just asleep during that period? I mean, that was my thought, is that if they're actually dead, where are they? What happens when you die?
Right. So you want to know where their souls. Of course, that opens up to another few years of study. But yeah, of course, that's the
So
question.
where am I going to go? Let's start.
So in the Hebrew Bible, you're going to Sheol, right? That's where your body goes, and there's not a lot of discussion about it, right? There's no world to come yet. There's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no purgatory. Sheol is just it's underground because that's where they put the body, so they figure that's where you are. But those are really, really good questions. I'm just not sure we get. Yes, Rita Claire. Rita Claire is going to answer your question.
I did ask Bill to let me know, and he told me that he would put it in navigation.
Oh, that's what Bill told you?
Yes.
Okay, so Bill's going to put it in your GPS. So okay, all right. For those who
I'm
don't know,
waiting.
Rita Claire's husband Bill passed away 3 months ago, so 3 months ago. So I think Tom, you want to say something, and then
Yeah,
Ajit.
no. The definition of Sheol is in some ways like the classical definition of Hades, which is not hell. It's just this sort of amorphous place where people go after they die.
Right.
And that sounds somewhat similar.
Yeah. I as far as I know, yeah, it seems so. Ajit, I think you wanted to say something.
Well, there's a story in the New Testament about Peter and Paul getting into a fight. If you go back and read the story, Peter and Paul got into a fight when they both ran into each other at the home of Simon the Tanner. I just wanted to throw that out.
Okay. So Simon the Tanner is somebody we need to look into.
The fight between Peter and Paul and what they were fighting about.
Okay.
There's almost a sense that they came to physical blows. That.
All right. Okay. Any other further comments, questions?
Do you think, could these miracles have happened in a lower chamber, or were they upstairs closer to God?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. I don't think that they thought in those terms. Although maybe, to my mind, the only reason it happens in the upper chamber here is because it happened in the upper chamber in the Book of Kings, right? That's the only reason it's here. Now, why is it happen in the upper chamber in the Book of Kings? Because that's where they built this room, this extra room, and for the prophet when he came by, and that could simply be. I would need to look at comment, but that could simply be because when you have a house, the only way to add on is upwards. The whole thing of flat roofs, right? In the ancient Near East or in Middle East in general. Not so much in Israel today, but it used to be. There's flat roofs and you build upwards on it.
For privacy.
Yeah.
Usually we think of an upper chamber as a place of solitude that you go to be quiet and
believe it or not, it's thought of as a place to be cooler in Jericho. In Judges 3, Eglon, the Moabite king in his summer palace, has an upper chamber which was cooler, I guess because it was exposed to the winds. We don't really think his upper chamber as being cooler, but Okay, folks. So thanks for being here, and we'll be back in full force next week. Okay.
Thank you very much.
David, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Rabbi,
much.
are we having Shabbat this Saturday morning or no?
Oh, we're gonna skip this more. This.
But we have Friday night. We're gonna
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.